This is East Asia Tonight.
Good Friday evening. I'm Natalie Edwards. Tonight's top stories. All eyes on a highly anticipated call between Presidents Trump and Xi, aiming to seal a TikTok deal and possibly break ground on bigger issues such as tariffs. Is North Korea getting a raw deal? A think tank says that Pyongyang sent Russia $10 billion worth of weapons and troops, but got back just $1.2 billion, mainly in food and oil. A Japanese defense panel urges Tokyo to boost its military with advanced tech, relax arms export rules, and deepen ties with partners, citing growing ties between China, Russia, and North Korea. And China's annual Defense and Security Forum wraps up, with Beijing insisting its military is committed to peace and stability, while stressing that Taiwan's return to Chinese rule is a core part of the post-war order.
I'm Olivia Xiong, and also on East Asia Tonight, we're taking you to the FutureChina Global Forum right here in Singapore, where it's been an insightful day of discussion and even debate among industry leaders and investors as well, where on everything when that they have been discussing, from US-China relations to whether more stimulus is on the cards for Asia's top economy.
Now, U.S. President Donald Trump has set his sights on a TikTok deal ahead of a phone call with Chinese leader Xi Jinping later today. The talks could settle the TikTok drama after Mr. Trump repeatedly postponed a ban that was designed to force the sale of the app's U.S. operations. But Beijing has not confirmed if the call is actually happening. This comes after an agreement between U.S. and Chinese trade officials earlier this week in Madrid. Congress had initially ordered the app to shut down if its U.S. assets were not sold by Chinese parent company ByteDance. That deadline has since been extended to 16th of December, giving negotiators more time to find a new owner for TikTok. Now, Mr. Trump, who has delayed the ban for the fourth time, said a deal is very close.
TikTok has tremendous value. The United States has that value in its hand because we're the ones that have to approve it. I specifically get the right to approve it. The people that are investing it are among the greatest investors in the world, the biggest, the richest, and they'll do a great job. And we're doing it in conjunction with China.
The potential conversation would be the American and Chinese leaders' second call since the Trump administration slapped massive tariffs on China. Mr. Trump has floated the possibility of another extension to their current trade truce, which ends on 10th of November. Both sides dramatically hiked tariffs against each other during a months-long dispute earlier this year, disrupting global supply chains. Well, the state of play for U.S.-China relations was one of the talking points at the FutureChina Global Forum in Singapore. CNA's senior China editor and senior correspondent Olivia Xiong sat down with Ryan Haas, director and senior fellow, Brookings Institution, and he weighed in on what could be next for Beijing as it navigates tensions with Washington.
Well, I think going into the talks in Madrid, there was sort of a sense that if the United States and China cannot agree on TikTok, which is the lowest of the low-hanging fruit, the areas where there should be ability to get a deal done, then perhaps the more ambitious agenda will have to be set aside for a while. And so TikTok became sort of a litmus test of the ability of the United States and China to work out a deal. And it appears that the two sides were able to do so rather efficiently. But the reason why this call is so important between the two leaders is that both systems have become sort of mirrors of each other. Very leader-led, top-down, personalistic systems where what is said by the top leader sets the tone for the entire government and the entire relationship. And so I think that the call that will take place soon will sort of set the direction and set the tone for the relationship in the period to come.
With regard to TikTok, we previously heard a lot of talk about national security concerns as the reason for this ban or sale deal that the U.S. administration has been after, whether it's the Biden administration or now the Trump administration. But it seems that under the Trump administration, the talk about national security concerns has gone away. What is your read into this in terms of where it stands in the priorities of President Trump?
Well, I think you were absolutely right, Olivia. A year ago at this time, on a bipartisan basis, virtually unanimously, Congress passed a law saying that TikTok needed to be banned and removed from the United States. The law went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ratified the law's legality, and it was sort of established fact that TikTok was a national security threat that could have the potential to poison the minds of Americans' youth. President Trump used TikTok as a vehicle for re-election, and through that process sort of became connected to it in a way and saw real value for TikTok to him and his ability to get his message out. And as part of his pledge to his supporters, he said, I will, unlike any other American politician, I will be the one that will save TikTok for you. And so I think that part of this is sort of delivering on a promise to his supporters that he will do something that no other American politician would have sort of the courage or the boldness to do. I also think that it shows that President Trump is operating without too many political constraints in his approach to China. Congress has been relatively silent. The courts have been relatively passive. The Democratic Party has not mounted a sustained sort of pushback against his approach. And so he's pushing out as far as he can in the period that he has.
Well, creators and influencers around the world will also be closely watching that phone call between Presidents Trump and Xi. They're concerned about what TikTok's potential ownership transfer could mean for those who rely on the app for a paycheck.
For 33-year-old Tantri Wayuni, live streaming on TikTok isn't just part of her daily routine. It has become her financial lifeline. Wayuni is among thousands of Indonesian content creators who have built their livelihoods on TikTok's live streaming features. But the ongoing uncertainty over TikTok's future has left her anxious about her family's finances.
Sebenarnya sih kalau dilihat ya, kalau TikTok semakin terus berkembang, semakin peluang orang dapat rezeki di TikTok dan nafkah untuk keluarganya itu makin besar. Saya merasakan itu karena saya merasakan selama ini jadi TikTok saya bisa punya bangku gaming, saya bisa beli handphone, saya bisa nyekolin anak saya 3 gitu. Jadi sangat-sangat saya butuhkan TikTok itu, jangan sampai, kalau bisa jangan sampai nggak ada deh itu karena.
Running 3 shifts a day, she greets loyal followers, plays music and dances for virtual gifts that convert into real money. US President Donald Trump on Tuesday announced an agreement between the US and China to keep TikTok operating in the United States. The agreement requires TikTok's American assets to be transferred to US owners from China's ByteDance, potentially resolving a saga that has lingered for nearly a year. While individual streamers like Wayuni worry about losing their primary income source, some business owners, like Fahmi Rido, see more opportunities on the platform with this deal. Rido runs a Muslim women's clothing business that uses TikTok as a promotional tool and believes that the potential deal can help him reach Muslim consumers in the US.
Di Amerika kan ada Muslimnya juga. Dia ngelihat konten saya di TikTok. Bisa jadi awareness baru untuk dia. Bisa jadi akan ada konversi sales di situ.
The White House has extended the deadline for the deal until December 16 and declined to provide any further details on the agreement with China.
Now, a Japanese Defense Ministry expert panel is proposing that Tokyo boost its defense capabilities by tapping on technology for deterrence and building up its domestic defense sector. It expressed concern over growing strategic cooperation among Russia, China, and North Korea. Well, the panel submitted recommendations to Japan's defense minister today. And CNA's senior correspondent Michio Ishida has more.
Japan is currently ramping up its capabilities in areas such as standoff missile defense, unmanned asset, and cross-domain operations across land, sea, and air. The panel called for these to be advanced further for deterrence purposes, such as by equipping submarines with vertical launch systems for standoff missiles, but warned of challenges such as rising costs and manpower constraints. The panel also urged the government to strengthen the domestic defense industry to prepare for any contingencies. This includes increasing production of equipment such as drones and expanding its stockpile of ammunition and fuel. Japan's primary arms supplier is its ally, the United States, and the panel says both sides should work together to lay out detailed plans for expanding deterrence capabilities. But it is also calling for joint development of defense equipment and arms transfer with countries other than the U.S., adding that it is important to push for strategic cooperation. The panel says Japan needs to decide on what defense capabilities it needs for the next decade, taking into account the security environment and demographic trends, namely its falling population. It proposed that defense spending should remain at 2% of Japan's GDP. The panel, which includes academics and former defense officials, released its proposal after 1.5 years of discussion. It was set up to look at how Tokyo should strengthen its security capabilities in line with its 5-year defense build-up roadmap through fiscal year 2027 and chart the direction for Japan's future defense policy. Michio Ishida, CNA, Tokyo.
A think tank report says that there are signs of an unequal partnership between North Korea and Russia, even though their military cooperation has intensified. The Korea office of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom says North Korea has sent some $10 billion worth of weapons and troops to Russia since 2023 to support its war against Ukraine. Well, that's more than a third of the North's annual estimated economic output. But Pyongyang has only received $1.2 billion of compensation in return, mainly in food and oil, along with a small number of air defense systems, GPS jammers, and possibly fighter aircraft. The report says there is no evidence Moscow played a direct role in Pyongyang's technological modernization and that the North Korean economy was in a dire situation under this unequal partnership. A North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, meantime, has ordered some research into the use of AI in attack drones. State media KCNA released footage of Mr. Kim overseeing drone tests, showing him standing in front of one that looks similar to the US MQ-9 Reaper drone. Other images show the drone in the air and missiles striking distant targets. The North Korean leader is calling for more production of drones, saying it's a major military activity asset and a top priority for modernizing its armed forces. Pyongyang unveiled its first attack drones last year, and experts say its new capability in this area could be linked to closer ties with Russia. Now, breaks up next, but coming up on East Asia tonight, Hong Kong's IPO fortune set to get a boost from China's Xi Gold's $3.2 billion listing, poised to be one of the world's largest this year. And the Bank of Japan takes another step towards unwinding its massive stimulus program, deciding to start selling risky assets as it keeps interest rates steady in a divided vote. Hello again. You're watching East Asia Tonight, and you are just in time for some business news with Henry Yin. Henry, Hong Kong apparently gearing up for yet another big listing. What's that all about?
That's right, Otelli, and the listing will be one of the biggest in the world since a $5 billion share offering in May from CATL, and looks to make the most of the gold punching through record highs. And Zijin Gold, the overseas gold mining arm of Zijin Mining and one of China's largest state-owned miners, has filed for Hong Kong listing to raise $3.2 billion. It will spin off from its parent, but Zijin Mining will remain 86.7% of its shares. Zijin Gold aims to sell 349 million shares at an offer price of 71.59 Hong Kong dollars each, according to a prospectus filed with the Hong Kong Exchange. Shares are set to begin trading on September 29th. The listing comes at a time when gold prices are hitting record highs as demand for safe haven assets surges amid broader market volatility. And Zijin Gold plans to use the proceeds to settle the acquisition of a gold mine in Kazakhstan, as well as for upgrading and constructing existing mines over the next 5 years. And Zijin Mining's Shanghai-listed stocks gained as much as 3% during morning trading, with its year-to-date gain at more than 60%. Its parent shares were up more than 2.7% in Hong Kong. Meantime, gold has doubled in value since the start of 2023 and now trades around $3,656 per ounce. The Bank of Japan kept interest rates on hold amid lingering political uncertainty and economic concerns, but says it would start offloading funds bought as part of its earlier monetary easing campaign. The latest policy decision leaves the benchmark interest rate at 0.5%. That's a divergence of the U.S. Federal Reserve that cut rates by 25 basis points yesterday. The BOJ has kept rates at that level since January. The announcement came hours after official data showed inflation in the fourth largest economy slowed to 2.7% in August, with rice price rises slowing following a sharp spike that rattled the government. Governor Kazuo Ueda says the Japanese economy would continue to recover moderately, but warned that U.S. tariffs were weighing on manufacturers' profits.
米国の関税政策は製造業を中心に収益面でマイナスの影響を及ぼしているものの、これまでのところ設備投資や雇用、賃金動向を含め経済全体に波及している様子は伺われません。こうした下で消費者物価の基調的な上昇率は引き続き 2% に向けて緩やかに上昇していると見ています。
SoftBank Group will lay off nearly 20% of its Vision Fund team globally as it places its bets on artificial intelligence in the United States. The cuts mark the third round of layoff at the Japanese investment conglomerate's flagship fund since 2022. Vision Fund currently has over 300 employees globally, unlike previous rounds when the group was saddled with major losses. The latest reductions come after the fund last month reported its strongest quarterly performance since June 2021, driven by gains in public holdings such as Nvidia and South Korean e-commerce firm Coupang. The move signals a pivot away from a broad portfolio of startup investments. East Asian markets on pins and needles ahead of Trump's Xi call due later in the day, with discussions expected to cover the TikTok deal and tariffs. While the mainland stocks weakened in choppy trading, the Shanghai Composite Index lost by a pace of 0.3% at market close, pulling back from a 10-year high. While the Shenzhen Composite Index just a tad in the red, and the Hang Seng Index also closing flat there. And Japan's Nikkei 225 flipped to a loss following the BOJ's policy move. Stocks in South Korea and Taiwan also ending the week on a cautious note. U.S.-China trade talks are on top the agenda at the FutureChina Global Forum. I caught up with Professor Alfred Skipke, Director of East Asian Institute at NUS, on the sideline of the forum. I started by asking him how the Xi-Trump call and the subsequent trade arrangement could affect Southeast Asian economies.
The biggest thing is it would manage expectations and it would help in terms of investments. There are a lot of investments that are currently on hold because nobody knows what the ultimate outcome will be. So a trade deal would facilitate, provide confidence to business to then make decisions of where to move toward changing supply chains, potentially, and I think that will be very positive.
You mentioned actually in one of the sessions that we are seeing a trend that shifting from global efficiency to regional resilience. So with the rising tensions among big powers, how should companies in this part of the world navigate and adapt to that kind of changing trend?
I think for companies it's super important to recognize that we are at the end of the day moving more toward blocks, bolstered by free trade agreements, but they will be more bilateral. So that means that you have to focus and manage your risks accordingly. Global companies might have to think about doing business in particular countries, replicating their operations and their supply chains. That's, of course, not as efficient as just having one global company focus on the entire world. But that is that resilience that companies probably want to have.
Mm-hmm. And one of the hot discussed topics these days, de-dollarization. But you believe with the rise of, stable coins and more popularity of cryptocurrencies, we are actually seeing a trend of dollarization. Could you please elaborate on that more for us?
I think it is important to recognize that we have two different forces. I think with the U.S. now fully embracing crypto and stablecoin and the Genius Act, there is this tendency for potentially more dollarization. We've already seen that in some countries, not so much in this part of the world, but in some other countries where there's a tendency to issue stable coins linked to the US dollar. That is one tendency. But of course, many countries are also thinking of how can we ring fence and ensure that we are less reliant on the US dollar given that tensions are rising. So we're moving toward a fragmented world. And that is, there is, of course, push for the internationalization of currency. That includes the RMB. But I think the real action we're going to see on the payment system side, this is sort of like the plumbing, the financial plumbing that underpins many of the activities. And what we here see is different countries are using different technologies that initially will not be compatible across systems.
Mm-hmm. Well, in the meantime, we are seeing China is trying to cut its excessive capacity in the industrial sector. At the same time, people start to worry about how about the investment in the AI sector, because that sector is booming. So is that a concern for you that we could be facing the same overheating investment problem in the AI sector as well?
No, this is sort of like China's great benefit, but also a major challenge. China is able to mobilize resources almost instantaneously. Given that there is now a push for technology, capital is moving into areas of technology, but also human capital. If you're at a university today, you're basically giving up your previous career, you're moving into STEM. So we're going to have a large number of university graduates. I think the Chinese government is very much aware of it and wants to avoid that each local government is competing with itself, with their neighbors, to be in the space of AI. But system-wise, that will be very, very difficult to manage. What is super important is that China strengthens its mechanisms to allow and potentially force companies to exit. I think the problem is, including in sectors such as EV, that it's very difficult to get a company out of the business because you have soft budget constraint, local governments basically trying to keep companies alive, and that needs to be strengthened to ensure that only the fittest ultimately survive and to avoid overcapacity or a price war.
And we have more coverage on that forum later on in the show, but that's it for now for business.
All right, looking forward to that. Thanks so much for the report, Henry. Well, we are going to go for a short break now, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, China's annual security forum, Xiangshan, comes to a close, with Beijing's power projection taking the spotlight. We get the lowdown from a Chinese military expert. This is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Donald Trump set to talk to Chinese leader Xi Jinping later today. The U.S. president telling reporters a TikTok deal is very close. A think tank report says that North Korea and Russia are showing signs of an unequal partnership, and Pyongyang appears to be on the losing end. And a Japanese expert panel calls for a defense rethink that involves more tech integration and homegrown arms to boost deterrence. China's power projection took center stage once again this week at the annual Xiangshan Security Forum in Beijing, shortly after a dramatic military parade earlier this month. Now, before we get expert analysis, here is a quick recap. Chinese Defense Minister Dong Jin had hailed Beijing's efforts to reshape global governance as he stressed that his country's strong military was a force for peace. He also said that the People's Liberation Army would never allow any Taiwan separatist attempts to succeed. Analysts also pointed out the minister's veiled swipes at the US. The Chinese defense chief said that the might is right approach will see the world led by the law of the jungle. For more on this, let's bring in Zhou, a senior fellow at the Center for International Security and Strategy in Tsinghua University, and he is also a retired senior colonel of China's People's Liberation Army. Well, thanks once again for joining us, Mr. Zhou. First of all, I want to talk about Taiwan, where basically Dong Jin warned against external interference on Taiwan. So help us understand this. What actually really crosses the line when they're talking about interference? Is it about arms sales? Is it about naval transits, high-level visits? Tell us what are some of the lines there that it's being drawn.
That is really a good question because both China and the United States talk about red lines without specifying what kind of red lines actually are, because in the past, where China certainly was more ambiguous because it was not so strong, right? But now China is becoming stronger with its military strength, so therefore we are seeing the United States is still keeping this strategic ambiguity, but this kind of strategic ambiguity actually would not be that much confident as compared with before. So I think neither side has specified what the red line is, but I believe both sides have a good understanding of what the other side wants.
Oh, Mr. Zhou, we spoke to an analyst and he pointed out that when China talks about multipolarity, it's less about everyone playing by common rules. Now that's multilateralism, and it's more about big powers carving out their own turf. Here is how he put it, so let's listen in.
Where I think Dong Jun's speech was fairly interesting to me was when he talked about the need for sort of regional and region-led solutions, right? So in contrast with this call for unity, he's essentially saying that there should be a sort of prioritization on regional actors. And so other actors that might have interests in the South China Sea, in Taiwan, should basically stay out. And that also, I think, is interesting when he brings in this idea of multipolarity, which is different from multilateralism. Multipolarity historically means you have big powers, they carve out areas of the world which they're dominant. So there's a certain tension in Dong Jun's comments.
So, Mr. Zhou, from your experience in the PLA, do you think that what we heard there, Professor Chong's interpretation, is fair? Do you think Beijing genuinely see multipolarity as a path to shared security?
Of course, absolutely, because this is not just what Beijing thinks. It's actually the common sense of the people around the world, including the United States. And actually, American Secretary of State Rubio has talked about how it is not normal to have a unipolar power. So at the Munich Security Conference this year, the theme of the conference is multipolarization. So China definitely is in support of multipolarity, and of course China is polar itself. The question is, the world is becoming less Western, and even the West itself is becoming less Western. So how could the West overcome its mentality and believe that, okay, they're but equal members of the international community? So I think it will take some time, because maybe it will take another 10 to 20 years for the United States to come down to realize that they do need to have more cooperation with China. You see, during the first period of Trump administration, very few areas of cooperation actually are mentioned. But ever since Biden administration, they have been talking about how China is needed in terms of cooperation, how China should persuade Russia, how China should persuade Iran, and how China should even talk to Houthis, right? So China's role is indispensable. But China, of course, would like to, stand together with all these major powers, big or small, to talk about all these issues. So China's formula for global governance is not that it wants to overthrow the international order, but that it will, cooperate with other countries to address the common challenges and threats.
And Mr. Zhou, we also heard strong words on freedom of navigation operations, and we have also seen the rising tensions, right, with the Philippines. So I'm curious to know, how do you think China basically is trying to balance its message? It talks about safeguarding peace, but at the same time, it has that firm military posture in the South China Sea.
Well, it's very simple. I don't believe that there would be a conflict between China and the Philippines, simply because China is overwhelmingly stronger. Well, just think of the fact, the Filipinos has stranded a Russia ship on the second Thomas Shoal and have stayed there for 26 years. If China wants to do anything, how easy that would be for us, right? So yes, the Chinese Coast Guard used the water cannons, and that might be very impressive on TV camera because the people would people are instinctively sympathetic with a smaller country. But what if I told you between China and the Philippines, actually it's the Filipino Coast Guard who used the force against the Chinese fishermen in 2000, 2006, and 2013. Yeah, so far, what the Chinese Coast Guard has done is just to use water cannon. And that actually is a kind of effort to avoid use of force. So using water cannon, in my eye, is a kind of deterrence.
Right. So the forum that we saw, it wasn't just about, policy papers. There were some heated exchanges as well. And I want to pick up on this striking moment that we saw a Tsinghua University dean. He was openly challenging an Israeli delegate on Gaza and saying, quote, that you should have shot the terrorists, not the children. So, Mr. Zhou, I'm just curious to know, this is quite unusual. What does it tell us about the Xiangshan Forum's wider role in international dialogue?
Well, I know who you're referring to. You're referring to Professor Yan Xutong, a well-known Chinese scholar on international relations. I think on this issue, what has happened in Gaza, the international community should have no ambiguity whatsoever, right? More and more countries are starting to recognize Palestinian as a state. Well, what has really happened? It just I was told, some Israeli visitors, just to think of this: if all the dead bodies of all these innocent people are put on the ground, 70,000, how big the ground would be, right? And most of them are innocent people, right? And do you have to kill all these people simply because you want to kill the so-called terrorists?
Right. So that was one striking moment. There was another idea that was raised at the forum, and that was Beijing could learn from German reunification after the Berlin Wall to incentivize Taiwan. Mr. Zhou, but given Taiwan's advanced economy, its democracy, and distinct identity, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, how realistic is that model?
Well, at the Shangri-La Dialogue, American Secretary of State Peter Hegseth said that, a kind of conflict might be inevitable and could be imminent. This is totally contrary to what the remarks of his predecessor, right? And I believe that we still have time, and Chinese government still has patience. You see, as China becomes stronger, actually, China could just embark on two different roads in two different directions. One is because it's getting strong, therefore it will become more confident about eventual peaceful reunification. The other thing is it could become impatient because it is getting strong, right? I think the former is still true because the Chinese government is still talking about peaceful reunification, which best serves our own interest. But what you are seeing now is in the island of Taiwan, the Taiwanese leader is really becoming provocative. He described himself even before being elected, as a pragmatic Taiwanese independence worker, and he now would describe the Chinese mainland as a hostile foreign force. So who is going too far, right? So we very much are having the same policies, but it's the Taiwanese separatist authorities that is becoming more and more provocative. So even if I would say that China should be more confident, I sometimes do have some fear that this kind of patience is running a little bit thin now.
And Mr. Zhou, do you have a timeline for reunification?
Well, I do not have this timeline because according to our roadmap, China should realize the greater reunification of the Chinese nation by 2049. Some people say, okay, that would have to include the reunification with Taiwan, but you would not find such kind of wording in the official Chinese document. So I firmly believe that reunification is a must. Just imagine, with China becoming ever stronger, how can China afford still to have some of its territory still separated from mainland China? Yeah. Otherwise, how could you describe yourself as a country that has achieved greater rejuvenation? So this is a must, and definitely it will be realized. The only question is through what means. So right now we are still having patience. We still talk about peaceful reunification, but the Taiwanese authorities should realize that time is not on their side and Taiwan cannot move away.
Many thanks for your thoughts there. Zhou Bo, a senior fellow at the Center for International Security and Strategy in Tsinghua University, and he's also a retired senior colonel of China's People's Liberation Army. Thanks so very much for that interview. Well, it is time now for another break, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight. From trade to AI, big questions about China's future are in focus at Singapore's FutureChina Global Forum. We'll bring you more when we speak with our senior China correspondent in just a bit. Global trade tensions in focus at this year's FutureChina Global Forum. Investors are watching the expected phone call in the coming hours between the U.S. and Chinese president and the implications it could have on the world's two largest economies. Well, observers are weighing what's next for Beijing, which is navigating tensions with Washington and slowing economic growth. And for more, CNA's senior China editor and senior correspondent Olivia Xiong is live at the FutureChina Global Forum in Singapore. Olivia, what were some of the key insights?
Well, there was a lot to take away from today. We've been speaking to business leaders, investors, as well as experts. And there are a few key themes that have come up. One of them, as you mentioned there, China-US relations, also the strain in turn on the global trading system. But one of the items that has really been in key focus is the trajectory of Asia's top economy. Where is China's economy headed? And in a session I moderated earlier today, I asked the panel of experts just how optimistic they were about China's economic trajectory. Have a listen.
从1到10，您现在对中国经济的乐观程度有多高？1表示完全不乐观，10表示非常乐观。
我说是6吧。
6，梁博士。
6吧。
6大顺是吧？张董，不好意思。
我认为是5。
沈博士，
大家都这么悲观，那我就乐观一点，我就8吧。我有些理由可以支撑我的，要从消费角度考虑。
好，Dr. Wetzel。
8.8。
8.8，哇，非常吉利的数字。
So a mixed bag of figures and optimism there from the panel, but certainly quite telling. I also asked the experts just how likely is China able to reach its GDP growth target for this year of around 5%. And the answers range from it'll be about there to a firm yes, and then to a definitely yes, but Dr. Wetzel there saying that she wasn't sure whether or not that would be a good thing. And that's also, as we've seen, sluggish data in August when it comes to the growth of retail sales and factory output. And some of the experts also deferred on whether we'll see more stimulus on the cards. I spoke to Dr. Liang Hong of Huatai Securities and asked her also why we're seeing growing optimism in China's equity market despite what seems to be weak macroeconomic data.
If we talk about equity market, it is inherently a pricing of the future outlook. So I think in that sense, it is consistent. Despite some of the weaker short-term data, the market is very excited about the future path of Chinese growth. The market can be right or wrong, but I think what has been really changed since the beginning of the year, one is very important, the DeepSeek moment that made the whole investor space, both domestic as well as international, to realize how innovation is being progressed in China. On the other hand is the big geopolitical shift that made people realize, again, maybe investors globally are overexposed to U.S. assets and they have underweighted or underexposed to emerging market, in particular China.
Talking to many observers, how sustainable is this bull run that we're seeing? Because there have been comparisons with the past where we've seen perhaps similar optimism, or is it different this time?
It's not. I think if you compare with, a lot of people compare this bull market, if we call it a bull market, to the 2014, 2015, but we had other bull markets, which is the one from starting from 2003 to 2007 beyond. If we look at the similarities and differences, I would think this bull market has more resemblance to the first decade, the bull market in the first decade, rather than the 2014-15. Because if we look at what is driving the market, one is definitely so-called liquidity. But what is liquidity? It is the relative returns to your alternative investments. Whether in China it's relative to your fixed income bank deposits, or whether globally is your investment to US dollar assets. So that liquidity has fundamentally changed since September last year. China lowered the rates, but really, if we think about global reallocation of assets, probably more diversified away from U.S. assets, both equity and bond. But I think where the debate is the fundamental. What is going to be likely the growth path of Chinese economy in the coming years? 1, 3, 5. That's medium term, near term enough. I think this is where market got really excited when DeepSeek comes in. If you remember last year in China, the most popular narrative about China is because of the property sector problem, because of aging population, China is mostly likely to follow Japan's path. So we will have 3 lost decades. I think DeepSeek shook that narrative. If again, demographics is not the determining factor for growth. It's actually, a lot of people realize, it's innovation. And if you look at where inflation is most vibrant and strong in the world, it's probably the US and China.
What is your assessment of how mature this innovation ecosystem is within China? Or do you foresee there's still needing to be certain tweaks or reforms to support the fundamentals that you speak of?
I think, again, this comes back how you think about China. When people talk about Japan, they are thinking about a very mature, developed economy. But despite 40 years development in China, per capita income in China is barely $13,000. So in my mind, I think this is still a teenager. Then when you talk about the ecosystem, it definitely is not perfect, not mature, but it has that raw animal spirits. That's what a lot of investors, when they look at the emerging market, why they want to have exposure to it, because the growth potential, the dynamism. So it's young. A lot of things will help, but I would think in all emerging markets, some of the corporate governance reform that matter a lot. This is another thing that people didn't realize. In the past few years, the equity market in China struggled, but structural reform that continue to improve the governance of the market has been really delivered continuously.
And so, as you heard, there are challenges and bright spots in Asia's top economy. And looking ahead, what we'll be keeping an eye out for is the release of China's next 5-year plan, a blueprint that is likely to chart its trajectory on social and economic goals in the near future and the road ahead. Back to you, Telly.
Well, thanks so very much for that report. I know it's been a long day for you. Appreciate all your hard work. Livis Young, CNA's senior China editor and senior correspondent. And just before we go, we turn to Pakistan, which is banking on an unlikely export to boost its struggling economy. Donkeys. Well, surging demand from China has pushed up prices at local markets, offering greater profits for traders, but raising concerns over animal welfare and illegal slaughter. Hira Mustafa files this report for CNA from a donkey market outside the capital, Islamabad.
This donkey market in Gondal, 100 kilometers from Islamabad, draws farmers and informal workers from across Pakistan. For centuries, donkeys have been the backbone of rural life, transporting goods and plowing land. But in recent months, rising inflation, soaring prices and surging demand have put them out of reach for many farmers like Farman Ali.
पहले की कीमत 15-16 अभी हो गई 32, 33, 34, 35 समझो जहाँ सालाना महंगाई है जहाँ मंडी आती है.
Donkey sellers say growing demand from Chinese buyers has pushed up prices by more than twofold over the past few months.
चीन वाले लोग आते हैं उसके वजह से गधे को खरीद ज़्यादा होते हैं उसके साथ महंगाई होती है.
Donkey hides are a key ingredient in traditional Chinese food, medicine and cosmetics, making these animals far more valuable than ever before. But the world's largest consumer of donkey meat and hides is seeing a decline in its domestic donkey supply. It's looking to imports, with countries like Pakistan emerging as new sources.
This is just one of many donkey markets operating across Pakistan, a country that is home to the third largest donkey population in the world. As demand from China continues to rise, officials are now rushing to set up donkey farms in the hopes that the beasts of burden will bring in millions of dollars that could help revitalize Pakistan's ailing economy.
But the rising demand has fed concerns that unregulated meat could slip into local food chains. Authorities recently raided an unlicensed facility near Islamabad, seizing nearly 1,000 kilograms of donkey meat and rescuing more than 50 animals. It's also sparked fears of abuse and illegal slaughter.
Animal rights experts, including veterinarian Dr. Kurtalain Shafkat, want stronger safeguards.
तो उसके लिए इम्पॉर्टेंट है कि जो रेगुलेशंस बन रही हैं या जो लीगल फ्रेमवर्क है वो इतना स्ट्रॉन्ग होना चाहिए कि उसमें एनिमल अब्यूज़ इनकाउंटर ना हो सके, कोई भी एनिमल को अब्यूज़ ना किया जाए. इस चीज़ को बहुत ज़्यादा इनको चेक एंड बैलेंस रखना पड़ेगा अगर इफ़ दे वांट दिस टू वर्क इन अ प्रोडक्टिव वे.
The government says it is taking steps to protect its donkeys. Officials say only one slaughterhouse in Gavada has been cleared for export. Any slaughter outside of this facility will remain strictly prohibited. Authorities are also cracking down on black market dealings, and plans are underway to better regulate donkey exports. For CNA, I am Hira Mustafa in Gondal, Punjab, Pakistan.
And that wraps up Friday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. Thanks for watching.